Tonight, the bishop stabbed in his Sydney church backs Elon Musk, says yes, let that Twitter of his attack be seen on Twitter. And now Sydney University students are copying American student protests against Israel by occupying their campus. But there are some very spooky things about these protests. Also tonight, a new study that's great news, at least for me. Old is now 75. But is that true? And much more, including John Howard comparing Anthony Albanese to Bob Hawke, and another ABC cover-up. But first, these terrorism raids today. Terror raids in Sydney after, and warning, this is distressing, after the stabbing of Christian Bishop Mamari Emmanuel last week, allegedly by a 16-year-old boy from a Muslim family. 7 people arrested so far in raids that were mostly, reportedly, in Greenacre. That's a Western Sydney suburb that is now 47% Muslim. 32% of the locals, a third, are of Lebanese descent. It's the kind of suburb that again tells us that immigration today actually looks more like colonisation. And the old hope, of multiculturalists and the next generation, they'll just assimilate. It's not true in many cases. Now, there's 7 arrested today, are all juveniles, 15, 16, 17. 5 others are still being questioned.
We will allege that these individuals adhere to a religiously motivated violent extremist ideology. It was considered that the group subject of our attention posed an unacceptable risk and threat to the people of New South Wales.
Yes, they were Muslim, but the police were not keen to say so. I'm going to talk about that in a second. They were almost apologetic.
We identified links between the alleged offender and a network of associates and peers who we believe shared a similar violent extremist ideology. At this time, we have no evidence of specific locations, times or targets of a violent act. I want to be very clear, we target criminality and not countries. We target radicalisation, not religion.
Well, there's some clues there, but so many of them children. Well, Mike Burgess, the boss of ASIO, our top spy agency, talked about just that at the National Press Club today, blaming social media for radicalising the young.
Fortunately, there's been a growing number of minors in our counter-terrorism caseload. That did peak a couple of years ago to 50% of our priority counter-terrorism caseload. It dropped off again for a while, but it's picked up again.
Blaming social media again. How convenient. Who's there to object? In fact, today, that address at the Press Club by the ASIO boss alongside the head of the Australian Federal Police, Reece Kershaw, made it clear that multiculturalism today is a weakness, a challenge. I think we've got to look at this side of things. It's now clear that a multicultural society needs heavier policing and much more censorship. Or so our leaders and police think. The Federal Police boss and the ASIO boss sure gave that game away today. And they helped to explain the federal government's frantic attempts to ban footage of that bishop being stabbed. Reece said he was all for it.
You don't want it to add fuel to the fire in the sense of people being able to download it and be inspired by it, whether that be in Australia or anywhere else.
Inspired? We now have people here who see a bishop being stabbed in the head and think, they'd like more of that. That's concerning. Now, Kershaw might also mean, I don't know, maybe he means that some Assyrian Christians seen that video of their bishop being stabbed could be inspired to get violent themselves, which we also saw on that night, some attacking police for not handing them the youth who allegedly stabbed their bishop for them to deal with. This is a church from the Middle East. Maybe there's another cultural challenge right there. But all this weren't the only signs that multiculturalism has become a security nightmare. Now, Burgess warned that we had a range of ideologies that promoted terrorism, principally a Muslim ideology, but look how he tacked on Christians to his list.
There is a range of ideologies, violent extremist ideologies that are drivers in the environment, religiously motivated. Sunni violent extremism is the principal in that concern, but a few years ago we had a Christian violent extremist attack in this country.
How woke. You might wonder why Christian terrorism is even mentioned alongside the Islamist terrorism that has caused such devastation. And tacked on based on, what, a soul riot in Western Sydney? I wonder if the penny's dropped with you. It's fear. The Albanese government and our security agencies obviously now have a policy to say as little as possible that might offend Australia's Muslims, that might make them feel picked on. And that's out of fear of what a minority might then do. Now, you've seen, the government, for instance, how it can't mention our obscene levels of anti-Semitism without immediately deploring what seems to me an almost invisible Islamophobia as well. Even when condemning a Greens MP who said, oh, there's Jewish tentacles everywhere.
I find it had its origins in anti-Semitism, and I condemn it unequivocally. Just as I condemn forms of that I have seen. Islamophobic comments.
I tell you, this is the new policy. I showed you that AFP Deputy Commissioner earlier saying, well, we're not picking on a religion. Kershaw, her boss, today even said, well, it was unfortunate police did have to raid those homes, like it was rude.
And there is a major operation underway in Sydney, and we do have to make, unfortunately, lawful interventions to prevent any further planning or attack on our community. So those teams have been very successful in preventing many attacks in this country.
These raids are in relation to the attack, are they?
Yes.
Unfortunately, many plots, I don't know. And then there was this.
Our respected leaders of faith tell us how the interpretation of religion is being purposely distorted on social media. Because of this, their communities and religious beliefs are tarnished and blamed for violent acts carried out by those who've been radicalised.
That's nothing to do with the religion. It's the fault of social media. And like I say, it's so convenient. You know, you'll offend no one saying that. And the answer then is obvious. We just need to censor social media, right? Like the Albanese government wants to do. Well, actually, I'd like to ask where the parents of the radicalised are. That's what I always ask for a start. What are the parents? But let's face hard facts. Social media feeds off reality as much as it does lies. The reality is, in fact, that the biggest sponsors of terrorism aren't just some marginal hate preachers in some tiny Sydney mosque. They include the Iranian government, Islamic fascists. It includes the Palestinian Authority, ruled in the West Bank, the Hamas terrorist group that ran Gaza. In Australia, Sheikh Taj al-Din al-Hilali, the late Sheikh Hilali, when he was the country's mufti, even called the September 11 terrorist attacks on America God's work against the pressers. And when John Howard, as Prime Minister, created a Muslim community reference group, he found, to his shock, that a third of its 14 members actually supported Hezbollah, notorious for its terrorist wing. I think it's now declared a terrorist outfit. Now, it's true that Islam's top leaders in Australia today seem far more moderate, yet not one that I know of has publicly condemned the Hamas terrorism of October 7, the slaughter of 1,200 Jews, the rapes, the taking of hostages. Few, if any, have stood publicly against the Sydney hate preachers who've been calling Jews online rats and quoting Holy Scripture about killing them. And what's the Albanese government done about that either? I mean, well, what have the police done? No. It's, as you see, much easier to demand a ban on the video of the bishop being stabbed. So much easier just to stifle debate than to ask why politicians have changed our country so much with their mass immigration, their identity politics, their multiculturalism. Change it so much that they've helped turn parts of this country into dynamite, where free speech is treated like a match. But like I said at the top of the show, Archbishop Mamari Emmanuel, Archbishop is a bishop, shouldn't promote him. Mamari Emmanuel has said, yes, let Twitter show that video of him getting stabbed. That's what Twitter or X's barrister has told the federal court. But that's the video that the Albanese government and its e-safety commissioner are telling Twitter to ban or face fines of up to $785,000 a day. Now, Twitter boss Elon Musk is refusing. He says it's about free speech. And for that, the government has been abusing him like kids in a playground, yet again today.
We're seeing megalomaniacs like Elon Musk going to court to fight for the right to show terrorist content, alleged terrorist content on his platform.
Joining me on Wednesday, every Wednesday, is Rowan Dean, editor of The Spectator Australia, host of Outsiders of Sky News every Sunday at 9 a.m, top show. Rowan Dean, so much to talk about here. I mean, the heads of the federal police in ASIO today making clear, look, this video will incite more such attacks. So what, we ban it?
This is a disgrace, Andrew. I'll read you a quick couple of words from George Orwell. Every record has been destroyed or falsified, every book rewritten, every picture has been repainted, every statue and street building has been renamed, every date has been altered. History has stopped. This is what we're talking about now, banning the truth. No society ever flourished, Andrew, when it started censoring and banning the truth. The piece of video footage that we are talking about was an attempted murder of the bishop in his church, live streamed at the time everybody saw it. To now run around after the... Sorry?
Alleged.
To now run around after the event and start saying that this truth that we all saw, that's a real event, that was inspired by whatever we need to know, should be banned, is covering up the essence of democracy. It is covering up the essence of liberty. And Peter Dutton needs to do a massive handbrake U-turn on this, Andrew, because he is heading over a cliff to defend the banning of the truth. That is what is happening in Australia right now. And worse than that, we are the laughingstock of the world who can see what is going on. And when you have, Andrew, politicians are resorting to ad hominem attacks on people like Elon Musk, oh, he's a billionaire, oh, he's this, or he's arrogant, or whatever, you know they don't have a story. You know that they're obfuscating. You know that they're hiding what is really going on. You referred earlier in the show to the events today. We know that in all likelihood the reason for this ban is to not offend Islamic sensibilities within Australia. Now that is unacceptable, I'm sorry. You have the truth can be shown. This is not about what Peter Dutton was talking about the other day or appeared to be talking about. This is not about violent, weird imagery or so on, pornography, any of that sort of stuff, which of course there's the role of government is to monitor and assure that innocent people, children in particular, are protected from that sort of imagery. We are talking about
it's not that.
An Orwellian cancelling of the truth.
Rowan, if it was a recruitment video, if it was spliced into a recruitment video like the Islamic State used to do, okay, I got it, do it, right? Threats of violence, no. But this is a straight record. And I think this is going a step too far. I know there's a danger. And I know there's offence. If you're going to be offended by it, don't look it up on social media. Pretty simple. And the danger is, well, why don't you treat the real causes before you go for the easy hits that don't actually solve anything? But Rowan, it's really easy to demonise the youths arrested today, allegedly, for whatever, radicalised plots and all that. And we should be arresting them. Meanwhile, students, white ones too, at Sydney University are now copying the campus sit-ins from the top American universities, anti-Israel, in effect, hostile to Jews. Rowan, people who don't think for themselves, you can tell that. People who think for themselves don't have to chant. These are Sydney Uni protesters, almost all the anti-Israel protesters, they do chant. Here are the ones at Sydney.
Free! Free Palestine! Free, free, free Palestine! Free! Free Palestine! Free, free, free Palestine!
Chanting is a giveaway, isn't it, Rowan?
Yes, because they don't actually know what they're saying. They're repeating words. It's like a cult where they sit around, zombie-like, just repeating the words that they don't even understand. And that's certainly the case here. The irony, of course, is that it is this sort of chanting and the plethora of this material over the last 6 months since October 7th that is, of course, is having an influence on young people and impressionable young minds. The Albanese government's quite happy to have, where's the Jews or gas the Jews or whatever you wanted, whatever it was, quite happy to have that character yelling, I'm elated out there in Greenacre, I'm elated because of October 7th. Quite happy to have all of that without any commentary. So they're lying. There's another agenda at play here. And the reality is that what we are seeing is a very well orchestrated and organised campaign around the world within our universities to basically brainwash young, gullible minds into this Hamas mindset. That is where the police should be looking. That is where anybody who donates money to any university now should be pulling that money out as fast as they possibly can. Because what we are seeing is deliberate political campaign using our universities and young people.
Look, spot on. Look, this is selective outrage of that video. I mean, I saw the video of George Floyd getting killed, allegedly, by a police officer leaning on his neck, played endlessly, even when American cities were being burned down to the ground, some suburbs, some blocks of those American cities, by protesters enraged by what they saw. There was no call to ban that video, right? And right now,
exactly.
I mean, here again, we're talking about incitement. White adult academics. Here we are talking about banning a video when staff at Sydney University were, it seems to me, openly supporting the Hamas terrorism of October 7, the slaughter of 1,200 Jews. And remember, this is a protest at Sydney Opera House just 2 days after the killings and rapes, before Israel struck back. Listen to this.
So we're staff from Sydney University, and we're saying that resistance is justified.
Resistance is always justified.
Rowan, when that's now in the culture, preached by academics at Sydney University, how can anyone be surprised if some youths treat Hamas as a guide? And this has got nothing to do with videos on YouTube.
And the reality is, Andrew, that I support free speech. They're allowed to have their opinions and go forth with those opinions, but I don't want to finance them with my tax dollars. And I certainly don't want anyone I know who believes in the Enlightenment values to be putting their money into these universities if these universities are incapable of controlling this sort of hatred of Israel, hatred of the Jews, anti-Semitism. Fine, go off and say what you want to say, but don't do it on the taxpayer's dollar. That's the big obscenity there.
Well, imagine a Jewish student in a class taught by one of those. Rowan Dean, thank you so much for your time. Former Prime Minister John Howard didn't miss today. He joined a growing list of people alarmed by the Albanese government's latest plan to spend tens of billions of your dollars on businesses it think will be winners, green businesses, of course, under something that's called the Future Made in Australia scheme. Now, the scheme has already been attacked by the Productivity Commission boss that this government actually handpicked, and now John Howard writes in the Australian today that Anthony Albanese was going back to the kind of failed economic policies that another Labor Prime Minister, a great one, Bob Hawke, had scrapped some 40 years ago. He said Hawke knew that the world was round. The present Prime Minister is a flat earther. Joining me, Cameron Milner, former Chief of Staff to Labor leader Bill Shorten, now Director of GXO Strategies, and Michael Costa, former New South Wales Labor Treasurer. Cameron Milner, what's going on here? I mean, the government even just handed over $330 million a couple of days ago to some of Australia's richest firms, including Rio Tinto Wesfarmers, to pay for technology to cut their emissions.
Well, I think that's a great idea. I think Chris Bowen did the right thing by supporting big industrial companies and big miners. Isn't it good that we're decarbonising those key exports from Australia? So, no, I think that's money well spent. I do worry about picking winners, and I agree that we have got to be very cautious, and I respect Prime Minister John Howard's words, and I also Bob Hawke's reforms, but the $330 million went to resources companies and chemical companies and cement companies, and that was money well spent to decarbonise critical exports and critical parts of our economy.
Oh, but it's a money churn. This is a money churn. Michael Costa, give me the hard-nosed economic ex-treasurer point of view.
Oh, look, I just can't believe what I just heard. I mean, look, as I said last week, this is straight out welfare corporatism. It's crony capitalism at its worst. Taking taxpayers' money and handing it out to a company at the same time as claiming that the green transformation, the energy transformation, is going to lead to hundreds of millions of new opportunities for people and tens of thousands of jobs, just smacks of lack of confidence in your own nonsense. This is just diabolically stupid, and it's going to fail, and we all know it's going to fail. Companies will take handouts whenever they're given. I don't blame them for doing that. They're not going to hand it back. It fits in with their ESG agenda, the ESG agenda to show that they're good corporate citizens, so they'll take the money and pretend they're doing something for climate change. But the bottom line is government should not be involved in this. This is either going to stand on its own legs in the marketplace without subsidies, or it's going to fail, and it is going to fail. As for John Howard, I think it's good that he commented in the same way I think I did last week, and other people have. He might have also pointed out that the Fraser government, which he was the treasurer in, was bloody hopeless too, and Hawke had to reform after they'd mismanaged the economy for a while. But, the point is that it's a waste of money.
Yep. Well, I tell you what, the predominant sound now of business leaders meeting the Albanese government is oink, oink, oink. The inflation rate, the annual figure came down again today, but not as much as expected. Prices in the last 3 months to March actually went up a full 1%. This is not quite going where we need, is it, Cameron?
No, it's not. It's in the right direction in terms of that massive headline inflationary numbers which we were surviving only last year. But yes, it's intractable inflation at the moment. We need to keep fighting it. We need to keep putting down pressure. It's not just our economy, other economies are suffering as well. But it does mean that those interest rates cuts that we so desperately need could be pushed off further and further. And that's a real worry for all Australians.
Do you agree with that, Michael?
Well, I agree with the economic analysis. I mean, interest rate cuts are highly unlikely this year, but I also think that we should aim the blame to where it ought to be. I mean, I think the federal government is not doing the right thing in this area. Clearly, you can see that on the one hand, it's got an immigration program that's feeding into housing and feeding into those cost pressures. Its energy program is as well, and its industrial relations program is also going to increase input costs, which is going to keep inflation going. You don't need to go past the education. The New South Wales government handed out, an enormous pay increase to teachers without any productivity. And we see in these latest figures that education is one of those areas where the inflation has gone up, and it will, because that'll all flow through into the private sector and private teaching. So, the government's got to do more.
Yeah, I think so too. Cameron, I'd be fascinated to know what you say about this, given your background in Labor, but also now, strategising, presenting how companies can put themselves in a good light too. This government is picking this massive fight with Twitter to ban that video of the bishop being stabbed, calling Twitter boss Elon Musk all sorts of names, he's arrogant, he's a megalomaniac, he's whatever. I mean, what is the real game, the government's real game here?
Oh, it's faux outrage and it's a complete distraction. The last thing they want is for people to continue to see that appalling attack only last week on a Christian bishop giving a sermon in a Christian church. It's appalling. It's appalling. So, of course, not the hate preachers, not the Islamic extremism we see on Twitter and Meta and everything else. No, none of that's offensive. A Christian bishop being stabbed, allegedly, that's what's got to be taken down. No, this is terrible and just smacks of distraction from the Prime Minister. If he was serious, he'd take down his own Twitter account. I mean, this is a Prime Minister who loves tweeting pictures of Jodie with a diamond ring and lots of pictures of Toto and him out walking, hashtag dog lover. I mean, this guy, if he was serious, would get off Twitter completely, and then we might actually have a bit more belief in what his faux outrage is at the moment over this one video that I think rightly people need to see, because we need to see what's happening out there in the community with Islamic extremism and the consequences of it.
It's interesting, isn't it? I think you might be onto something there, Cameron. But Michael, I guess it's much easier for the government to pick a fight with Elon Musk, a billionaire overseas, than it is to pick a fight with, I don't know, a verse or two of some Islamic preachers preaching the Quran.
Look, I think the fight with Elon Musk is actually quite bonkers on their part. It fits in with this sort of approach now that we've got, that if you don't agree with something, it's disinformation. In terms of the video, I mean, I have no problem with the video being on as long as it doesn't show the final moments, the physical stabbing. I think that that ought not to be there, as I, was appalled by all of those ISIS beheading videos. So I think there's an argument to restrict that component, but you can't restrict the fact that the event occurred. And their motivation for this is to me inexplicable. It smacks of great hypocrisy, but I think the underlying problem for me is having a disinformation commissioner coming out and choosing what we can and can't see. And as it always is, if you disagree with them, it's disinformation. What they say is fact.
No. If I had really had to choose between Elon Musk and the Albanese government deciding what I wanted to see, what I could see on social media, I think I'd still choose Elon Musk.
Me too.
Really. Michael Costa, Cameron Milner, thank you both for your time. Really appreciate that. After the break, an ABC cover-up of the most biased interview probably I've seen in I don't know how long, years maybe. So we've got Labor now telling us we need a new law against misinformation on social media, and ABC's journalist, Well, why not start just by tackling misinformation on the ABC? I mean, who pushed the fake claims that Cardinal George Pell was a pedophile, that Bruce Pascoe is Aboriginal, that the Great Barrier Reef is dying, if not dead already? Who for years pushed the misinformation that Donald Trump colluded with Russia to steal an election?
Tonight, we begin our special three-part investigation into the story of the century, the election of US President Donald Trump and his ties to Russia.
You got it, the ABC every time, but the ABC's got a protection racket going, protecting its own misinformation and its bias. I told you a few weeks ago about the most biased interview I'd seen in months, maybe, I don't know, maybe a couple of years. And it's by that same presenter you just saw, Sarah Ferguson, refusing to believe the obvious truth that Israel killed an Australian aid worker by a terrible accident.
We've taken responsibility for the mistake.
Peter Lerner, I'm not accepting your view that it's a mistake. There's a lot further to go on this story, but thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Good evening.
Joining me on Newswatch is Sophie Ellsworth, media writer for the Australian newspaper. Sophie, the ABC got a lot of complaints about that interview, about it being what you actually just saw, ABC bias. So the ABC's own policeman, its ombudsman, investigated and found what?
Well, the ABC, Andrew, investigated the ABC and found that the ABC did nothing wrong. So basically, Fiona Cameron, the ombudsman, had received 52 complaints about this broadcast that aired on 7:30 and looked at the editorial standards of impartiality. Now, in that grab there, Sarah Ferguson said that she was not accepting of the view that these aid worker deaths were a mistake, but they did determine in the Ombudsman review that she wasn't speaking on behalf of her when she said I. She was speaking on behalf of the 7:30 report. So I'm not sure if viewers would quite pick up on that. But Andrew, watching it, and we spoke about this a few weeks ago, it did come across like Sarah Ferguson was putting her point of view across, which is very important, Andrew, because if she's doing that, this is the taxpayer-funded broadcaster that we pay for, and we don't want to hear their views. We don't pay to hear their views. We want them to sit on the fence when they're giving us content.
No, but actually, that ombudsman is making a distinction without a difference. In fact, it's implying something even worse. She's saying, no, it's not the bias of Sarah Ferguson. She wasn't speaking for herself. She was speaking for the entire collective, the whole 7:30. I mean, the whole lot of them don't believe Israel. I mean, isn't that what she's actually saying?
Well, that's the interpretation I've made from the report, and I've written about this, where she's saying she's not speaking on behalf of herself, she's speaking on behalf of the program. But look, Andrew, the big picture here is we have a problem at the ABC where often we talk about this week in, week out, where we see them push certain agendas and they're always one way. You never see them going on there and pushing conservative views. You always see it the other way. And unfortunately for the ABC, they just can't stop this because it's so widespread here. And I don't think they really want to do much about it.
No, they don't. Look, I'm going to have to look closely into that because I do think the Ombudsman has just said the Health 730 program has a collective view that not to believe Israel and claim that it was an accident. It's not just Sarah. So that actually makes it worse. Sophie, the Albanese government's trying to, picking this absurd fight with Twitter boss Elon Musk to ban one video. The US Senate has passed the vote to banning TikTok completely, unless TikTok gets sold, China sells TikTok. Tell us about this vote and what it means.
Well, basically, there's a push in the US to stop TikTok being available on platforms, allowing people to download it. There's obviously a lot of issues with TikTok, censorship, also what they're pushing on people, certain views, and also the mining of information of users that use the platform. So the US is really toughening up on this. So it could see TikTok banned from the US, Andrew. So it's not quite at that point yet, but it's certainly heading down that road.
Yes, I think they're making an ultimatum. TikTok, you have to sell to someone else. We don't want it owned by the Chinese government. An American owner would be great, but if someone's going to put up their hand for it. Sophie Ellsworth, thank you so much for your time. After the break, the thought police strike again. There's a bit of a theme going on here. We're fighting against the dying of the light. Now a leading academic has been sacked after a fight over a tweet accusing global warming guru Greta Thunberg of double standards. Surely not. A year and a half ago, Andrew Timming, a professor at RMIT University, someone with a PhD from Oxford, someone who's taught at top universities like St Andrews, posted a tweet. And that was the beginning of the end of his career. Timming had seen global warming guru Greta Thunberg reacting to a tweet from porn peddler Andrew Tate, boasting about his 33 cars and telling Thunberg to provide her email address so he could send a list of his cars and their enormous emissions, to which Thunberg replied, "Please do enlighten me. Email me at," well, I can't actually read it all out, small D-I-C-K, small D energy at getalife.com. So a win to Thunberg. Everyone's sniggering. But Timming pointed out some hypocrisy. He said demeaning sexual jokes were directed from a woman to a man, smiley face, wink face. Demeaning sexual jokes were directed from a man to a woman, bomb emoji, skull and crossbones emoji. Timming claims the university reprimanded him, threatened him with disciplinary action. He complained about that being a breach of academic freedom. One thing led to another, claims of bullying, the university telling him to take health leave, him getting another doctor to say he was fine, the university then giving him more duties and then sacking him when he refused. Now Timming has gone to the Fair Work Commission and, well, there's already a fight with a judge flying race flags. I spoke to Andrew Timmings a little earlier. Andrew Timming, thank you so much for your time. Were you sacked for simply not doing your job, or is it because of this tweet, really?
Look, the excuse that RMIT offered is that it was that I wasn't doing teaching that had been assigned to me. The real reason is that there has been a whole series, not just the tweet, but a whole series of occurrences or happenings at RMIT that demonstrate an unambiguous bias against individuals with a conservative viewpoint, such as my own. Obviously, the details of the case I can't talk about now, but I will say that when the facts come out in the Federal Circuit Court, the Australian public will be shocked at how their tax dollars are at work at RMIT.
Are you surprised that the university could have had such a strong reaction to the tweet? Because I would have thought, I've seen a million times more offensive, if that's the word, or provocative tweets from academics. Why would this one cause such a fuss?
Look, it was made against Greta Thunberg, and Greta Thunberg has an entire woke army of social justice warriors that advocate on her behalf. And my criticism of Greta Thunberg certainly didn't correspond with condoning Andrew Tate. I find him equally obnoxious. But what happened was Greta's woke army went to work. There were a number of formal complaints against me that went to the university, that went straight to the vice chancellor. I think they saw me. They knew that I was a liability as a conservative academic, and they saw me as problematic in that sense. But as I said before, I think it was less the tweet in and of itself and more the fact that I exercised a workplace right to lodge a grievance alleging violation of the intellectual freedom policy at the university.
And now, I mean, there's almost a suffocating ideology, and you came right up against it in the hearings, conciliation hearings, attempt to mediate with Fair Work Australia. You said the judge in that hearing, this is preparatory to you lodging your case in the federal court, you said he should not hear your case. Why was that?
Well, the process of lodging an unfair general protections dismissal claim in the federal court or the federal circuit court requires all applicants to go through an attempt at mediation in the Fair Work Commission. Now, in my case, in our case, I say our case because the Free Speech Union of Australia was representing me throughout these proceedings, we were allocated to a commissioner, Scott Connolly, who comes from a very strong trade union, traditional trade union background. This was knowing full well that throughout my career, I've made various claims against traditional trade unions, arguing that they are anachronistic, arguing that they are vehicles of far left woke ideology. And you can see this now with the trade unions' support for organizations like Hamas. So that was one factor. I've published on why it no longer makes sense to join a trade union, a traditional trade union, and then I get allocated this career trade unionist as a commissioner who was appointed by the Albanese government. That's obviously a conflict of interest. But perhaps more poignantly, during the lead up to our mediation session, I noticed that in the chamber's emails that were sent to me, there were not only the Indigenous flags, but also the Progress Pride flag, which very much, they argue, indicates inclusion, but it is very exclusionary for someone like myself with gender-critical beliefs. And so I pointed out the fact that in the UK, there have been a number of cases recently. There was the Forstater case and the Joe Phoenix case more recently that concluded that holding gender-critical beliefs is a legally protected characteristic. I hold gender-critical beliefs. I do not stand for what the Progress Pride flag stands for. And so we made an application for apprehended bias on the basis of the fact that the flags themselves and the fact that I have a strong sort of anti-union background may make it difficult for the commissioner to make an objective set of decisions in relation to my case. And it was dismissed. And I find the fact that it was dismissed was quite absurd because the university's lawyers, they hired a whole team of lawyers from Landers and Roger, they stood up and gave an impassioned plea for this commissioner to remain on the case. So if there was no apprehended bias, why would they care so much that Commissioner Connolly stay with my case?
Well, I guess it's open to the Commissioner to find that whatever his background, he can still judge impartially. That said, I must add that I would find that a hostile environment myself. And I think we've got to take that into consideration as well. Andrew Timming, fascinating case, a long way to go still. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
After the break, how old is old? Well, I've got great new research that says if you're my age, you've still got a decade to go. Plus, saving the planet by ruining the landscape. Now, a plan that farmers say could poison the Great Artesian Basin that gives them critical water. One of the strangest things I've seen in my life is how the left has turned into the very thing it condemned. And I speak as someone who worked for Labor twice 40 years ago. It was for free speech, now it's against. It was for Israel, it was anti-fascist, and now it's against Israel and acting like fascists. It was for saving the environment, now it's for destroying the environment to save the planet, supposedly. And I don't just mean it's ruining the view with all those horrific wind farms. The Queensland government is now waving through plans by Glencore, a mining giant, to meet the net zero emissions targets by capturing carbon dioxide, turning it into a liquid and burying it deep underground. In fact, burying it in the Great Artesian Basin, which is a massive water source for countless farmers who pump water from those aquifers deep under the ground, rainwater that's come off the Great Dividing Range and so on. And these farmers are scared that this carbon dioxide that's going to get pumped down there will dissolve harmful minerals underground and pollute their water.
The test injection itself is such a small scale that we can't see any scenario where it impacts any current or future user of that water. And we very much understand and respect the importance of the Great Artesian Basin, and that's why we've deliberately chosen a deep aquifer, one that contains brackish water that's unfit for human consumption. The CO2 that we're injecting is a food-grade CO2. It's very high purity.
That was Glencore's response to the farmers complaining that they don't understand what's going on, they don't believe it, got their own experts to say, no, it's a danger. Joining me is the panel, Federal Liberal MP Garth Hamilton, and Evelyn Ray, Sky News presenter, regular commentator on the show, and most importantly, a farmer herself. Now, Evelyn, I don't know if this carbon capture plan is a danger or not, but can you understand that farmers are thinking it's a risk not worth taking?
Look, I think it's important to always look at ways to do things better, but the most important part of that is to not do it recklessly. You know, you always have to take into account the consequences, the negative consequences, and have contingency plans for those sorts of things. And for farmers, contaminated water isn't just a negative consequence. And I know this from experience. Water is literally our source of life on a farm. It is our source of livelihood. It keeps our livestock alive. It keeps our agriculture alive. It's not just a little negative consequence here and there. It can literally mean life and death for a farmer and his stock. You know, I think on the coast, we take for granted perhaps the water situation, but people in Queensland particularly who rely on bore water perhaps and drilling into that water source, 100% they should be concerned because, like I said, water is life. I think that these sorts of things need to be approached with extreme caution. And I think, sadly, so many of these green plans don't take that into consideration. And history shows that they usually inflict more damage than they promise to heal things.
Now, Garth, the Great Artesian Basin actually starts round about where you're right now and extends all the way west for, well, what is it, about 1/6 of the continent or something. What do you make of this?
Well, look, the engineer in me does sort of feel there is some risk, and I would like to know more. Truth is, we don't know. This is untested. But I think the real point here, why is Glencore doing this? The only reason they're doing this is because of our net zero commitments. This is net zero. This is what it looks like. They've got no other reason to be engaged in this. And I think it's a very sensible view to have right now, looking at the concerns people are raising, that there are risks associated with net zero, that there are costs and consequences. And heaven forbid that the worst fears do come true with this experiment. There will be a great environmental cost just simply because we've pushed down this net zero pathway. I've been speaking on this for some time. Wherever you stand on net zero, I think we must admit there are risks. We're seeing that play out now. There are costs and there are consequences. There are other countries around the world having very sensible debates about their commitments that they've made to net zero, UK being one of them. Maybe it's time that we had that debate, certainly around the rate at which we're adopting this. And anyone who's pushing for us to go further can really have a look at the case here in the Great Artesian Basin and tell me why we should proceed with something that is completely untested, unknown, and putting a great natural resource at risk.
Yes, like I say, I have not studied the science well enough to form an opinion, but when there are 2 points of view, I'm a bit inclined to go with be careful. Some good news, though. Let's have some good news. Although it's probably better news for me than either of you, and better news also for some of the audience, given your age anyway. New research from Germany. They've interviewed 14,000 people at various ages. It says that people at my age, at least, the average perceived start of old age is now about 75. It's crept up, and that's because we live longer, we live healthier. 75. And I remember when I was a kid, someone 40 seemed ancient. Evelyn, 75, I mean, you're a spring chicken. Does it strike you as right, or are you thinking, nah, 65, that's about old?
Look, for someone who's about 4 decades away from 75, I read the study and thought, you beauty, gives us old girl a bit of hope that we haven't hit the wall yet. But I think it's more of a culture thing, to be honest. I think, people these days have to work a lot longer, whether it's cost of living or what. But, look at a few generations ago, kids married their childhood sweethearts. They started having children in their early 20s. They got a mortgage of $30,000, had it paid off, and could retire in their 50s. That was the normal way of life. Whereas you look at now, people, try before they buy for 20, 30 years sometimes, don't get married till their late 30s, maybe have 1 or 2 kids if they're lucky, have a mortgage of something they would never pay off in their lifetime, and then have to work later and later. So perhaps they're bumping it up because of this cultural thing. But like I said, I'm not complaining because it made me feel a bit younger, so it's good for me.
Well, certainly, it doesn't make me complain. I mean, it's odd, Garth, look, I am 64, and when I say that, I thought, I get a little shock every time, even now, because, that this is associated with that when I'm 64, the Beatles sang about it. I don't feel that at all. It's really weird. And it's when you think old age actually starts at 75, and, in your mind, that gives you a lot of years to play with where you don't want to be sitting there on the couch or just hitting a golf ball. You want to do something still at that age.
Yes, I'm only 45 myself, so 50 does seem a long way off, but I'm at the age now where every day I look in the mirror, I look more and more like my Aunt Colleen. Old age does creep up on us bit by bit. Probably raise the issue more, I think, around how do we get the younger kids now into homes? I think of my grandparents, and they were in homes that they built themselves, that they'd owned outright, and they were able to have a reasonably comfortable retirement. Goodness me, I hope we can make that situation available for the coming generations.
Well, Garth, the thing is, if you're not old until you're 75, I tell you what, you'll be having to get me out of this home with dynamite. So the kids have got little hope of inheriting this one for a long time yet. And that would apply doubly over the entire continent. I don't know. Evelyn Ray, Garth Hamilton, thank you both so much for your time. That's it from me. Coming up now is the most excellent Sharry Markson. But from me, it's good night.